3,650 days. That's how long it takes to lose your soul, piece by piece. Imagine holding your entire life's worth in a dirty, blood-stained rag, knowing that one wrong move could turn 10 years of sacrifice into dust. Hey friends, welcome. I'm Marcus. Another incredible gladiator story for you today. This isn't just a story about blood and sand, it's about the cost of a human soul. Let me know where you're watching from and please hit that subscribe button. Let's get started. In the suffocating darkness of the gladiator barracks, his fingers trembling as he touched the cold gold. 1 coin for a severed arm. 2 coins for a slit throat. 10 years of butchery condensed into a small pile of metal that weighed less than a loaf of bread. But this wasn't just gold. This was the key to the lock that had been around his neck since he was 17. He had enough. Finally, after a decade of hell, he had enough to buy his way out. He could smell the fresh air of the countryside already. He could almost feel the sun on his face without the shadow of the Colosseum walls blocking it. But then, a sound cut through his fantasy. A ragged, wet cough from the servants' quarters next door. A sound that smelled like death. Valerius froze. He knew that sound. It was the sound of a life ending before it had even truly begun. And in that moment, in the dark, the gold in his hand suddenly felt heavier than the heaviest shield he had ever carried. He didn't know it yet, but the hardest fight of his life wasn't going to be in the arena. It was going to be right here, in the shadows, making a choice that would shatter him. Valerius was known as the Iron Wall. You don't get a name like that by being flashy. You get it by refusing to die. For 10 years, you have to imagine this, he stood his ground while men screamed and charged at him with tridents, nets, and heavy swords. He wasn't the fastest. He wasn't the strongest. But he was immovable. His skin was a roadmap of scar tissue, a tapestry of near misses and jagged cuts that had healed into thick, white ridges. Every morning, he woke up in pain. His knees clicked like dry branches. His shoulder throbbed with a dull ache that never went away, a reminder of a hammer blow he took 3 years ago in Capua. Why did he endure it? Why didn't he just let his guard down one day and let a spear end the misery? You know why. Because of the box. A small, wooden box hidden beneath the loose stone in the corner of his cell. Every victory bonus, every coin thrown by a drunken merchant, every tip from a satisfied lanista went into that box. He didn't drink the wine the other gladiators bought. He didn't visit the brothels. He didn't gamble on dice. He starved himself of pleasure for 10 years. You can feel that hunger, can't you? The hunger not for food, but for the one thing Rome denied him, the right to say, no. The lanista, a cruel man named Batiatus, not the famous one, but a distant, nastier cousin, had set the price. 5,000 denarii. An impossible sum for a slave. It was a joke, a carrot dangled on a stick to keep Valerius fighting. But Batiatus didn't account for Valerius's discipline. Tonight, the count was complete. 5,002 denarii. He was leaving tomorrow. He was going to walk into Batiatus's office, slam the gold on the desk, and demand his wooden sword, the rudis. But as he packed his few belongings, the coughing started again. It was coming from the vents that connected the gladiator cells to the kitchens. It was Leo. Leo was 7 years old. He was the son of Ilara, a widow who scrubbed the blood off the armor and cooked the slop the fighters ate. Ilara was invisible to most. But not to Valerius. When Valerius had taken a dagger to the thigh last winter, it was Ilara who had sneaked in extra bandages. It was Ilara who had boiled willow bark to ease his fever when the doctors had given up on him. She never asked for anything. She just looked at him with those tired, kind eyes that seemed out of place in a house of killers. Valerius moved to the vent. Ilara? He whispered, his voice rasping from the dry air. Valerius? Her voice was thin, trembling. I'm sorry. Did we wake you? I'm trying to keep him quiet. Is it the lungs? Valerius asked. He knew the signs. The Roman cough, they called it. The damp dungeons of the ludus rotted you from the inside out. It's worse, she sobbed, the sound muffled by the stone. The physician saw him. He says Leo needs the Egyptian breath. A mixture of herbs from the Nile. And he needs to be moved to the coast. The sea air, Valerius felt a knot tighten in his stomach. How much, Elara? Silence stretched between them. The only sound was the boy's wheezing, a sound like crinkling parchment. 2,000 for the medicine, she whispered. Another 2,000 to buy his indenture contract from Batiatus so I can take him away. 4,000 denarii. It might as well be the moon, Valerius. He's going to die here. In the dark. If you're enjoying this story so far, make sure you're subscribed. We upload new Gladiator legends every single day. Valerius sat back on his cot. 4,000. He had 5. If he gave it to her, he would have nothing. 10 years. 3,650 days of bleeding. The time he had his nose shattered by a gauntlet. The time he was nearly trampled by a chariot. The nights he cried silently into his straw pillow because he missed the mother he couldn't remember. All of that suffering was stored in that box. If he gave it away, he was resetting the clock to 0. And he knew, deep in his bones, he didn't have another 10 years in him. His body was failing. The iron wall was cracking. If he stayed, he would die in the sand within the year. He looked at the loose stone. He could ignore it. People died in Rome every day. Kids died. It was the way of the world. Why should he sacrifice his freedom for a boy who wasn't his? Because you are a man, a voice inside him whispered. Not a beast. The coughing grew louder. It sounded like tearing fabric. Valerius closed his eyes. He tried to imagine the farm he wanted to buy. The quiet mornings. The grapes growing on the vine. Then he imagined Leo's small, pale face turning blue as he suffocated in the room next door. You know that feeling when your heart beats so hard it hurts your ribs? That panic? Valerius stood up. His hands were shaking, not from fear of a sword, but from the terror of what he was about to do. He pried up the stone. He took the heavy sack. It clinked softly. The sound of freedom. He walked to the grate. Elara. Yes. Come to the bars. He heard her shuffle closer. He couldn't see her face, only the outline of her hand gripping the iron. Take this. He pushed the sack through the gap. It was heavy. She struggled to hold it. What is this? She asked, confusion in her voice. Then she opened it. The gold shimmered even in the dark. Valerius, this is. It's his life, Valerius said, his voice flat, emotionless because if he let himself feel, he would break. Buy the contract first thing in the morning. Before Batiatus changes his mind. Get the medicine. Go to Ostia. Don't look back. Valerius, I can't, she wept. This is your freedom. Everyone knows. You've been saving since. Go. He snapped, harsh and sudden. Before I change my mind. Go, Elara. Save him. He heard her fall to her knees. He heard her kiss the cold iron bars of his cell. May the gods bless you, Valerius. May they carry you to Elysium. Then she was gone. Valerius sat alone in the dark. The box was empty. The hole in the floor was empty. He felt a strange lightness, like a man who had jumped off a cliff and was waiting to hit the water. He was a slave again. No, he was worse than a slave. He was a slave with nothing to lose. Morning came too fast. The horns blew. But today was different. The guards didn't just open the doors, they kicked them in. Up, scum! The head of the guard, a brute named Crixus, spat on the floor. Vitiatus wants you in the main courtyard. Now, Valerius stood. His joints popped. He walked out into the blinding sunlight of the training yard. But something was wrong. Usually, the gladiators trained in pairs. Today, they were all lined up against the wall, watching. In the center of the yard stood Vitiatus, wearing a silk robe that cost more than Valerius's life. And beside Vitiatus stood a monster. You have to picture this man. He was 7 feet tall. His skin was oiled and black as midnight. He wore a mask made of a bull's skull, and he held a hammer that looked like it could crush a chariot. Valerius. Vitiatus smiled, but his eyes were cold. My iron wall. I had an interesting conversation with my kitchen maid this morning. She came to buy her son's freedom. With gold. Valerius stood silent. His heart hammered against his ribs. She told me a generous benefactor gave it to her. Vitiatus laughed. A cruel, high-pitched sound. Imagine my surprise. My best fighter, giving away his fortune. It was touching, truly. I took the money, of course. The boy and the woman are gone. I am a man of my word. Valerius let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. They were safe. But, Vitiatus continued, his face darkening. This creates a problem for me, Valerius. You see, I had a bet with Senator Gracchus that you would buy your freedom today. I lost that bet. I lost a lot of money because of your charity. Vitiatus pointed a manicured finger at the giant in the bull mask. This is Titanus. He is new. He is hungry. And since you have no gold to buy your freedom, and no gold to bribe the armorers for better gear, you will face him. Today. In the prime event. The other gladiators gasped. Titanus was a legend from the southern pits. He didn't just kill, he pulverized. And Valerius, Vitiatus whispered, leaning in close, smelling of rose water and rot. Since you like to give things away, you will give away your shield. You will fight him with nothing but a short sword. No armor. No shield. Just you and the iron wall. The yard went silent. To fight Titanus was suicide. To fight him without a shield was an execution. Valerius looked at his hands. Yesterday, they held gold. Yesterday, they held a future. Today, they were empty. He looked up at the sun, blazing down on the sand. He thought of Leo, breathing the sea air. He thought of Alara, smiling for the first time in years. Valerius tightened his grip on the wooden practice sword hanging at his belt. He didn't feel fear anymore. He felt a cold, burning rage. He had given his money to save a life. Now, he would have to give his blood to save his own. Vitiatus turned to walk away, expecting Valerius to beg. To plead. But Valerius just stared at the giant, his eyes narrowing. Prepare the arena, Valerius said, his voice low but cutting through the silence like a whip. If I die today, I die a free man in my soul. But I don't plan on dying. The drums began to beat. The crowd outside the ludus was already gathering, sensing blood in the air. Valerius walked toward the gate, leaving his empty hiding spot behind. He had bought a child's future. Now he had to pay for it with pain. The gate began to rise. The roar of the crowd hit him like a physical blow. The shadow of the hammer blocked out the sun before Valerius even saw the swing. That is how fast death moves when it comes for you. You have to imagine standing on burning sand, your lungs screaming for air, staring up at a giant who isn't a man but a wall of muscle and iron. Valerius threw himself to the left, his body hitting the ground hard, rolling just as the massive hammer smashed into the spot where his head had been a second ago. The impact shook the arena floor. Dust exploded into the air, coating his sweaty skin in a layer of grit. Valerius scrambled to his feet, his knees popping, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He had no shield. His left arm, usually protected by layers of wood and leather, felt naked and heavy. He reached for a phantom defense that wasn't there. Titanus laughed, a deep, rumbling sound from behind that bull mask, and raised the hammer again. This wasn't a fight. This was a feeding. And Valerius was the meat. Titanus didn't wait. He charged like a siege engine. Valerius backpedaled, his eyes locking onto the giant's shoulders. You know that feeling when you are being hunted? When your brain stops thinking and only reacts? That was Valerius. He wasn't the iron wall anymore. He was the wind. He had to be. One hit, just one grazing blow from that hammer, and his ribs would turn to powder. Titanus swung horizontally, a sweeping blow meant to cut Valerius in half. Valerius ducked, feeling the wind of the weapon ruffle his hair. He slashed out with his short sword, aiming for the giant's thigh. The blade bit into flesh, but it was like cutting a tree trunk. Titanus didn't even flinch. He just roared and kicked out, his heavy boot catching Valerius in the chest. Valerius flew backward. He hit the wooden barrier of the arena wall with a sickening crunch. The air left his lungs instantly. He lay there, gasping, tasting blood and bile. The crowd roared, a deafening wave of noise that sounded like the ocean during a storm. They weren't cheering for him. They were cheering for the blood. Vitiatus was up in his box, sipping wine, smiling that cruel, tight smile. He wanted Valerius to suffer. He wanted to show every other gladiator in the ludus that hope was a disease, and he was the cure. Valerius tried to stand, but his legs were jelly. His chest burned with a fire that told him something was broken inside. He looked up. Titanus was walking toward him slowly, dragging the hammer through the sand, carving a line of doom. Why get up? The thought seduced him. Just stay down. Let the hammer fall. The pain will be over in a second. You fought for 10 years. You're tired. You're so tired. Valerius closed his eyes for a heartbeat. In the darkness, he didn't see the arena. He saw a small room. He saw a grate in the wall. He saw Ilara's tear-streaked face and heard the wheezing breath of a dying boy. It's his life, Valerius had said. If he died here, lying in the dirt like a coward, that sacrifice meant nothing. If he died here, Vitiatus won. And Valerius had promised himself one thing: Vitiatus would never own his soul. Valerius opened his eyes. The hammer was rising. With a scream that tore his throat, Valerius pushed himself off the wall. He didn't move away from the giant. He moved toward him. It was suicide. It was madness. Titanus paused, confused for a fraction of a second. Why was the little man running into the range of the weapon? That hesitation was all Valerius needed. As the hammer came down, Valerius slid. He threw his body into the sand, sliding between the giant's legs like a serpent. The hammer smashed into the wall where Valerius had been, splintering the wood and sending shards flying into the crowd. Valerius popped up behind the giant. He didn't slash at the legs this time. He jumped. He drove his sword into the gap of the armor behind the giant's knee, the hamstring. The blade went deep. Titanus screamed, a sound that silenced the 50,000 people watching. The giant crumpled to one knee, the hammer slipping from his grip. Valerius didn't stop. He couldn't stop. He scrambled onto the giant's back, locking his legs around the massive torso. Titanus thrashed like a wild bull, throwing his weight around, trying to crush Valerius. But Valerius was the iron wall. He held on with a grip forged by a decade of survival. Titanus reached back, grabbing Valerius by the hair, pulling his head back to snap his neck. The pain was blinding. Valerius felt his vertebrae grinding. He was losing. He was too small, too weak. He looked toward the Emperor's box. He looked at the sky. Ilara, he thought. Live. With his last ounce of strength, Valerius jammed the hilt of his sword into the eye-hole of the bull mask. He didn't use the blade. He used the heavy brass handle, smashing it against the giant's temple through the mask. Once. Twice. 3 times. The giant's grip loosened. The thrashing stopped. Titanus fell forward, face first into the sand, unconscious. Valerius rolled off, landing on his back. He stared up at the sun. He was alive. He was broken, bleeding, and gasping, but he was alive. The arena was dead silent. Even the birds seemed to have stopped singing. Then, one person started clapping. Then another. Then a roar erupted that shook the foundations of Rome. Valerius! 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 They weren't chanting for blood anymore. They were chanting for the man who refused to die. Vitiatus stood in his box, his face pale. He looked at Senator Gracchus, the man he had bet against. Gracchus was standing, applauding, a look of pure respect on his face. Vitiatus knew he was trapped. If he ordered Valerius's death now, the crowd would riot. They would burn the ludus to the ground. The Emperor Nero raised a hand. He didn't give the thumbs down. He didn't give the thumbs up. He simply waved his hand toward the gate. Freedom. Not by gold, but by glory. Valerius stood up. He didn't look at the emperor. He didn't look at the crowd. He walked to the center of the arena, where his shield should have been. He looked up at Vitiatus. And then, Valerius did something no slave had ever done. He reached into his belt. He pulled out a single coin, a copper piece he had found in the dirt earlier that morning. He threw it into the sand. It wasn't 5,000 denarii. It was nothing. But the message was clear: keep your money. I have something you can never buy. Valerius turned and walked toward the gate of life. The guards stepped aside, their heads bowed in respect. He walked out of the tunnel, out of the shadow, and into the streets of Rome. He didn't go to the brothels. He didn't go to the taverns. He walked straight to the city gates. If you are enjoying this story, make sure you are subscribed. We bring you the legends history tried to forget. 6 months later. The sun was setting over a small vineyard near the coast of Ostia. The air smelled of salt and ripening grapes. A man walked with a slight limp through the rows of vines. His hair was gray, and his shoulder clicked when the weather turned cold. Valerius sat on a wooden bench overlooking the sea. He took a deep breath. It didn't smell like blood. It didn't smell like fear. It smelled like peace. Valerius. A voice called out. A boy, healthy and tanned, came running up the hill. Leo. He wasn't wheezing. He wasn't dying. He was running with the energy of a storm. Behind him walked Alara, carrying a basket of bread. She smiled at Valerius, a smile that warmed him more than the sun ever could. Did you finish the trellis? Leo asked, jumping onto the bench beside the old gladiator. I did, Valerius said, his voice rough but gentle. Strong as an iron wall. Leo laughed. You always say that. Were you really a wall, Valerius? Valerius looked at his hands. They were calloused from farming. Not fighting. He thought about the 5,000 denarii. He thought about the 10 years of hell. He looked at the boy who was alive because of that money. He looked at the woman who had given him a reason to be a man, not a beast. No, Valerius said softly, putting an arm around the boy's shoulders. I wasn't a wall. I was just a man who learned that the heaviest thing you can carry isn't a shield. It's a full heart. Valerius closed his eyes, listening to the waves. He had entered the arena with nothing. He had left with everything. Many years later, when Valerius finally passed away in his sleep, they found a small wooden box under his bed. It didn't contain gold. It didn't contain jewels. Inside, There was only that single copper coin he had picked up in the arena, and a dried flower from the first harvest of his vineyard. He had saved for 10 years to buy his freedom, but in the end, he realized he didn't buy it. He earned it by giving it away, and that brings us back to the question we started with. When you hold your life's work in your hands, when you have everything you ever wanted, do you have the strength to let it go for someone else? Valerius did. And because of that, his legacy wasn't written in the account books of a Lanista, but in the laughter of a boy running by the sea. This is Marcus. Thank you for watching. Do you think Valerius made the right choice? Would you trade 10 years of your life to save a stranger? Let me know in the comments below. Subscribe for more stories of glory and redemption. Until next time, keep fighting.